Hi guys, my name is Kirsty and welcome back to Upside Down Books. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favourite reads so far in 2020, but no, it's not the one that I talked about a couple weeks ago. It is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. So, The Pull of the Stars actually came out on the 21st of July, so just at the beginning of this week, and I really wanted to talk about it because it's getting heavily mixed reviews, so I want to reassure you that it's fine, it's actually amazing, but you probably want to know what you're going into and be prepared to understand that being a woman is really freaking hard. So Emma Donoghue is an amazing author who this was actually my first time reading, and she is the author of the incredibly popular and then made into a film, Room. The Room? Room. Unsure if there is an article in front of that. So that was a really popular book that she wrote, which I've not read and I've not watched, but I think I might read it. That's certainly got a bit of an interesting sort of premise going for it, but I do like me some mystery thrillers to read, but certainly not to watch. But The Pull of the Stars is very different. It is historical fiction. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Pam McMillan for approving me for a copy of this. This is one that I actually requested because I really wanted to read it. I loved the sound of it and I thought it was super topical at the moment, and I'm so excited. It's not a particularly long book. It's about 300 pages long, so it's actually quite easy to polish off. And as I said, it's historical fiction. It is set in 1918 in Dublin during the height of the Spanish flu, which is why it is so topical. When you are reading this book, there are so many parallels to be drawn between then and now with COVID-19. So on Goodreads, as I am currently looking at this as of today's date, which is not the date this has been released, but a few weeks earlier actually, because once again this is being pre-filmed in advance, it has just 201 ratings at the moment, and it's got an average rating of 3.92 stars. And that's not a bad rating, but I feel like it should be like a little bit higher than that. And I did have a read through of some of the people's comments on it because it's sort of getting 5 stars or like 2 or 1 star, and I want to spend this video sort of explaining why it does deserve 5 stars, and so that you could choose whether it's right or wrong for you and not read it, hate it, and rate it badly, because that's just tragic when that happens. So, The Pull of the Stars is a story about midwifery, and it is a story about the trials of childbirth, quite specifically 100 years ago, when technology wasn't as good as it is today, and especially during a massive pandemic. If you don't know what the Spanish flu was, then how, and go and look it up, but the Spanish flu happened right at the end of World War II. It killed more people than the war itself, and it was absolutely devastating. Loads of people died from it. It could be very fast to act, etc, etc. So what Emma Donoghue has just written a book that takes a very small look at this 3-day period in a midwifery ward, but specifically the midwifery ward. It's not called a midwifery ward, it's called a maternity ward. Specifically at a maternity ward for women who are suffering the flu as well as childbirth. And it gives such an authentic vibe of the struggle and just the trials that the main character goes through. I absolutely powered through this book. I wasn't quite sure what to expect from it. I wasn't sure if it was just historical fiction or if there was an element of horror to it, and I guess in a way there kind of is, but not in a scary sense. It's just a very confronting book. So because the plot of this book only happens over quite a short period of time, we go into a lot of detail about the patients that Julia, the main character, is dealing with. So she's not particularly well off. She lives with her brother, who is a returned veteran from the war, and he is not all there anymore. Or no, I don't know if he's not all there, it's just he doesn't speak anymore after what he's experienced and the trauma of fighting on the front lines, and she is a midwife. So she goes to the hospital every day, and it is all of these really atmospheric scene-setting moments of like how they're trying to sanitize and how people are traveling on buses and getting to and from, and the fear of people coughing and sneezing, all stuff that we have pretty much all experienced in this day and age now as well. Every day she's turning up for work, and she has 3 patients on her ward, and for this period of the book that we're looking at, she is not the head matron, whatever the terminology is, just bear with me there. The matron, whoever is usually in charge of this particular ward, has taken ill with the flu, so Julia is just thrown into a position of authority, and she's a little bit nervous about it. She's by herself to start with, but soon she realizes she really needs help with the 3 patients who are all presenting difficult pregnancies and have different sorts of things going for them. So she gets some help from a young girl called Bridie, who is just sort of rustled up from somewhere random to kind of just be an extra pair of hands. So this is a really in-depth story about Julia's 3 days working on this ward in a position of power and what happens on those 3 days. So the book moves very quickly, it's very difficult to put down. I found it very hard to stop reading. The chapters are quite long, and that's what I found surprising, is that usually if the chapters are long and there's not that many breaks in between segments, I find it easier to put down because you don't feel like you're getting any reprieve, but I just found it so difficult because of the really clever crescendos and falls of the plot itself. So I would find myself being really fascinated about all of the intricacies of the setting and everything to begin with, and then something really dramatic will happen and then it sort of calms down a bit, and just when you're about to say, oh, maybe I'll make a cup of tea and take a break, do something else major happens, and again, really hard to put it down. So I think some of the things that people are getting a little bit intimidated with is the detail in which Donahue goes into these pregnancies. So none of the pregnancies throughout the whole book are simple. They're all really complex. There are lots of people dying in this book from the flu or from difficult pregnancies where the mother has not survived or the baby has not survived. So these are all things to be aware of going into it. If that is something that is triggering for you or something you do not want to hear about, then this is not the book for you, because they are so confronting and it's quite a lot to take in, and I'm not sure I'm going to have children after reading this, but I also must bear in mind that it's not quite the same condition. It's really, really heart-racing to read it because Julia is a very skilled nurse. She's well experienced, she's slightly more mature but not old, and she knows what she's doing. So she's thinking on her feet, she's doing some really amazing and inspiring stuff to save all of the babies and the mothers and try and make sure that they can get through their pregnancies as easily as they can. But there are so many other layers to this story, aside from things that are just horrific to read about and the detail and the pain that these women are in. We also have things such as the Sinn Féin? I don't know how to say it, but that's basically the rebel group that was rising for the... my history is sketchy here, but there was a civil uprising, an uprising, there was something, a rebel uprising in Ireland around this time, debating the whole topic of English rule and Irish independence. That has a lot of the setting going on as well, so it just kind of paints this picture of Dublin being this city in a massive amount of turmoil because there is a war going on, there's an epidemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, going on, and then there's a lot of political trouble going on as well. But in addition to that, because we are set in 1918, we also have through line that's underlying everything of poverty. So a lot of the women that are coming in to this ward are malnourished, too young, had too many babies, etc, etc. And it was really interesting to look at the different kinds of problems that were presented throughout the story, depending on what things were affecting them. I feel like I've never read about poverty, especially the type of poverty we're talking about from 100 years ago in Ireland, in this way before. It wasn't just about money or being down on their luck. It was about women not having the power to say, no, I cannot and will not, do not want to have any more children. It was about looking at what men can do to a woman's body, whether it's through domestic abuse or whether it is through forcing them to have children, or if we're talking about cases where women have presented because they have been raped and other things like that. It's just really upsetting to read about and be like, wow, the fact that this woman is in her 12th unwanted pregnancy and there are so many things wrong with her body because of the number of times that she has been pregnant was just horrific to read about and really eye-opening, because it's not something that in this day and age where women have a lot more control over what happens to their body, it's not something you really think about all that often. Certainly not in societies where we have the privilege of that in any case. But there are lots of other things about, yeah, girls being too young, so whether they've been taken as a young bride and their hips aren't wide enough, etc, etc. So there were so many interesting layers to this story. But yes, the important thing to take away is that this is really confronting to read. I think it's fantastic. It reads almost as a thriller because of the intensity of these childbirths, coupled with the fear and the extreme moments when we are looking at a case of the flu as well. There is some LGBT rep in this as well. There have been questions on Goodreads about when, where, why is it, because it's not really openly flagged as an LGBT novel, and I think that's because it's quite minor. There is an LGBT female-female relationship in this, and it is quite front and forward, but it happens much later towards the end of the book, and it's quite brief. But just so that you're aware, there is a beautiful female-female relationship in this, and it is just fantastic to read about. There's not too much more I think I need to say about this book other than it is well worth a read. It's not very long and it's something that you can just power through. So if you think that this is something that interests you, that is just sort of morbidly fascinating in almost an educational way, then I would definitely recommend that you pick this up. I imagine if you've read any others of Donahue's books before, then this is probably in the same sort of intense vein as some of the other stuff she has written, but I certainly think that this is right up there with the amazing stuff that Kristen Hannah writes. So if you're a fan of Kristen Hannah's writing, writing, then I would definitely say Emma Donoghue is for you. So this was a marvellous read and I am so grateful to have been given an early copy of it. I hope that more people read it and are loving it, and I hope that less people go into this unaware of how intense the story is. So take that away with you. This is a really intense book about pregnancies and death, and just be mindful of that when you go into that if that's not your cup of tea. Let me know down in the comments below if you're planning on reading this or if you've already managed to read it, because I'd love to know what you thought. But other than that, I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.